about 3 years ago. I struggled severely with depression and suicidal thoughts. Those thoughts later manifested into plots. I stay up at night thinking about how I want to go out of this world. I thought about pills, slitting my wrist, all the cliche stuff you see in the movies. Although, I eventually decided upon a slow bleed method. I constructed a plan to make a 2-hour drive from my house to the Inyo National Forest after work on a Friday and get lost. The plan was simple and stupid. I'd try to survive as long as possible until something killed me, be it dehydration, more fatigue, or whatever else nature had to throw my way. I ordered some survival essentials on Amazon, packed a bag, and left as planned. I don't know what made this slow bleed idea so seductive, but my mind was set to it. I had no idea where I was going, but that drive felt like I was 10 again, and on my way to Disneyland with my parents for the first time. I felt so overjoyed and relieved. I got there, parked my car behind some bushes and started walking. It was about 5 o'clock and the sun was falling quickly. Bad planning on my part, so I started running, deeper and deeper into the forest. I would run, then tire, so I'd walk a while, then run again, and I repeated this process for about 3 hours. I stopped at a clearing in the trees. It was around a little patch of mostly dead grass and leaves. I pitched my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and fell asleep, happy as can be. The next morning was far less tranquil. However, I woke up feeling like I had a terrible hangover, and I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there for at least 5 minutes. I began breathing rapidly and started jogging in random directions, trying to retrace my steps. I ended up getting even more lost and separating myself from my gear and tent. I tried telling myself that this is what I wanted. Well, for some reason, I knew it wasn't anymore. I remember repeating no choice over and over again. That was a really cold night. I tried doing push-ups to keep me warm, but that hardly lasted. I tried singing Vienna by Billy Joel, where I was too cold and my teeth kept chattering. Although the cold was nothing compared to the fear. Every falling leaf or trickling sound of the stream was a vicious predator in my mind. There was a point where I couldn't tell whether I was shaking from fear or the cold or a mixture of both. Finally, the morning came and I slept through most of the day on the ground, my back to a fallen tree stump. I woke at around 3 p.m. and once again I panicked. I began jogging in a seemingly random direction once again, till I hit the road I came on. That feeling of relief was something I would never be able to explain. It humbled me, yet lifted me up. I walked up the road until a very nice old man in a big black truck pulled over to see if I needed help. I told him I was hiking and got lost. He drove me up the road to my car and I drove home. That weekend changed everything for me. I have never had a suicidal thought again, and I got the help I needed to deal with my depression. This isn't very much of a survival story, but the whole experience changed my point of view on life and self-worth. I'm still working on constructing a suitable life for myself, but whenever I'm discouraged or I want to quit, I think back to that night in the forest, and after a quick shudder I realize just how much life means to me. It was a stupid plan, but I'm glad it was. I may not have survived a slightly more elaborate one. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into the Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks and forests because it's isolated, so my dog can roam and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy rough drives into parks sometimes and a lack of service and assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area. That feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I texted my boyfriend that it just didn't feel right in this area. But my phone completely lost service very quickly. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel on some broken glass mixed in with dirt on the gravel road. Yucca, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She's vocal, but I've almost never seen her growl at anything other than dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself on being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a little bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this road anyway, and that's if anyone's even there. I hear men's voices. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them. So I stop my car and then kind of freeze. Feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere. And I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for what the voices could be coming from. I've never run into people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and scared and focused on getting out of there, I just distinctly remember being surprised at hearing grumbling when we started outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine, and a huge open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself. The voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remember this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to that feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me, as well as frightening. I recently happened to cross some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes that it gave, and nothing much more. I googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination with this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming up fishing from our trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files, and ended up on some True Stories video dealing with the Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog and playing some Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly, he says that they are casually known to mimic voices. I mean, when I say that, I got horrible chills. I got horrible chills. I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me when I was probably close to a Wendigo. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange as hell when I start Googling Wendigos, etc. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they will live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, and I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I've done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I've never had such a bad feeling before. On top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seems strange, I don't think I'll be doing any more solo travels around there, unless it's around civilization, of course. Does anyone know of any authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had any kind of inexplicable experience like this? The year I turned 14 was the last year I would be permitted to attend my favorite summer sleepaway camp, St. George's. The camp is located in Orkney Springs, Virginia, a sleepy little unincorporated community entirely centralized around the existence of the Orkney Springs Hotel. Built in the early 19th century, then restored in the 70s after ownership changed, there is to this day a stagnant quality of time in Orkney Springs which contributed greatly to the mood of the camp. Everything was a frozen effect. Antique relics from the hotel's early history on display behind velvet robes. Old Southern recipes from the same line of moo-ma woman pumping hearty fare out of the communal kitchen. And the same rusty, dangerous elevator which campers were chastised to never play on leading up to the kitchen. The camp is also owned by the Episcopal Diocese, and so subsequently we shared the timeless sights, sounds, and smells of that place, forever caught in a long-ago decade. Being 15 is a fussy age. A little too old to enjoy macaroni art or tie-dye t-shirts or sing-alongs without that first hint of the self-conscious discomfort that comes with puberty. At 14, I was still content with these things, though they admittedly were already beginning to lose a little of their succor. As a camp senior, the option was given to me to pick one of the 3-day wilderness excursions: canoeing, hiking, or rock climbing. I chose canoeing, and then with the 10 other campers and 3 counselors, we departed in a van with our boats for what I assume now was the south branch of the Potomac River. We would be crossing over into West Virginia at some point, though that was often the case. The joke goes at St. George's that you can pick blueberries until Virginia and take a pee in West Virginia all in the same 5 minutes. The first day out, we passed boats with rural hunters as our canoes dragged lazily through a reedy dip in the river. They were the kind of West Virginian hunters you see in horror films, with 3 teeth, overalls over bare skin, and big old bloodhounds pawed in a wet next to them in their busted canoes. They cracked piss beer out of styrofoam coolers and spoke in a dialect so thickly garbled that I doubt even the counselors knew what they were saying. I remember one counselor holding a map out to the boat ahead of us, attempting to ask questions. The second day back out on the water under the burning hot sun, the counselors told us we were lost. Naturally, we were upset, but they reassured us that as long as we were following the river, eventually we would come out on the other end, nearing something familiar. Looking back now as an adult, I realized how young these counselors must have actually been, and I still wonder if their training was even adequate. The youngest might have been 17, the oldest in his early 20s, but I was 14 then, so I didn't want to think about any of those things. With little choice other than just to agree and keep rowing, we kept going forward. That afternoon, we pulled up on an unknown pebbly bank in order to make camp. A recent flood had torn debris from the river and washed it up on shores, as far up and down as the eye could see. All along the edge of the clearing, we found were natural teepee formations made of mangled tree trunks and wild, snarling branches. We dragged our canoes up the rocks to tuck them in beside the trees, and remember waves of tiny frogs fleeing in front of us in a green tide, and one fat toad that flopped on my boot toe. Wouldn't leave. Later, while hunting a suitable girl's latrine spot, I went inside one of the natural teepees and discovered the bloody skeletons of poached raccoons hanging wetly above. The blood hadn't completely dried yet. Their tails were still intact, fluffy in the breeze. A snuffed-out fire pit was directly below, and I thought the men with 3 teeth in their dogs were probably the ones likely to have done this. That night, we ate and sang camp songs and had s'mores, and looked at the stars. After dark, for a briefly frightening time, a certain moaning noise began to intermittently come out of the woods. Our counselors quickly rushed to reassure us that the sounds were from cows, and that we must have camped at the very edge of a farmer's grazing property. We quickly accepted this and went to bed. The girls went to their tarp in one corner. Yards away, the counselors slept in their tent, and the boys' tarp sat on the farthest side of our grounds. I woke up deep in the middle of the night with a mighty need to pee. I climbed out of the pile of snoring teenage girls, grabbed a flashlight and a bathroom kit, and ambled out into the trees to find a perfect spot. I don't remember being afraid in that particular moment, mostly interested in satisfying my bladder by emptying it. It was calm enough that when I encountered a strange figure a few minutes into my walk, I stopped, assuming it was one of my fellow campers. About 10 feet away from me, sitting on a broad, flat rock, was a young boy. He looked about my age, 14, maybe a weak 16. His head was buzzed and his hair looked pale, maybe blonde. It was cold outside in a way that only mountains can be at night, and yet he wasn't wearing a shirt. He was a little cave-chested, and he sat with one elbow propped up on his knee, barefoot and tattered, acid-washed jeans. He was smiling just a little and looking directly at me. My first inclination was anger. I thought at first that this was Alex, one of the boys camping with us who worked picking corn with his father. I was about to tell him off for being a creep and watching girls pee in the dark when I realized that there were a few fundamental things about what I was looking at that were wrong. This was not Alex. This was not Alex. This definitely was not Alex. The boy's eyes flickered in the beam from my flashlight, like a deer or a cat does when they cross headlight beams on the road. There was a glow of fluorescence to it that human eyes couldn't produce. I remember standing there for some time, just staring at him as my mind was trying to put this puzzle together. The length of time I stood there staring is the single detail I can attribute to knowing that this really happened to me, that it was real, when years later all I can think about is that science must have an answer to this somewhere. The universe is so huge that we know so little about it, but that I know that I saw this because I looked at him and he looks back at me, so directly, so incredibly aware of me and I, of him, until I realized I could see the trees behind him through his body. I could see through him. If she was smiling at me, then we were lost. There's a quality of fear when it becomes that incredibly intense, which makes you entirely lose your grasp of time. All I know is that I dropped everything in my hands, my toilet paper, my flashlight, and I ran through the dark. Before I knew it, I was lost in the woods. I have no concept of how long I ran alone through the dark. I have never been this scared in my life, and I pray that I never will be again. Everything gets distorted. Time, breath, space, thought. I don't remember screaming either, but apparently I was. I screamed loud enough that a friend woke up and came to find me, popping up unexpectedly from behind a bush and scaring the shit out of me all over again. The one miracle I can attest to is I never actually pissed my pants, though I think it would have been justified. Back at the camp, I tried to wake up the girls. I cried and begged for them to listen to me, that I thought I'd seen a ghost and we need to get out of here. But no one really cared. I tried to lay back down and go back to sleep, but I kept hearing footsteps circling around us just beyond the tree line. A constant crunch, crunch, crunch of two bare feet in the underbrush. The next morning when I retold my story to anyone who would listen, a few shy girls told me that they had heard the footsteps in the woods. When the sun was at its morning's brightest, after wrestling with myself about it, I finally returned to the rock that I found the boy sitting on. I stood on it and looked around at the ground. The dirt was scattered with a rusting shotgun shells. That day, we got back on our boats and followed the river back to the familiar territory. I don't have any recollection of where this site was, or if I could indeed ever find it again, though I know I would never want to. Behind the local college in my area, there are some beautiful woods. A deep rushing creek runs through it. It has a little bit of a valley, and it's a literally paradise. There is a magical quality there, and even a little tree spirit that I always visit and leave a little tribute to. My bestie and I are avid harvesters, and the woods behind the college literally have everything. I've even found berry patches that aren't usually in the area, and all the local herbs and medicinal plants that you need. It's really amazing. Several years ago, we were cranberry picking in the fall. Now I'm not really good at keeping my bearings, so I basically just went wandering through the woods with my nose in the berry patches and enjoying spending the time with my friend. Sometimes we were on the trail, and sometimes we would break trail, through the brush and forest to forage and wander. It's a small slice of woods in between two major roadways, with the college and residential areas at opposite ends, so the chances of getting lost are impossible, unless you are a total dunce. So I wasn't worried about getting lost where we were. We rounded up a hill, and there was a sort of clearing at the crest, with nothing but a tree sitting in the middle of it right by the path. Now, it is a spruce tree, and spruce trees can either grow straight, or if there are upheavals in the soil, they can curve in weird ways. This tree was curved into a reversed S shape, but instead of it looking like a natural growth, it looked like the tree had been twisted violently into an unnatural shape. I really can't describe it better than that. I grew up in spruce forest, and I've never seen a tree that I thought looked like it had been purposely warped like that. As I walked up the path towards the tree, I suddenly heard a ringing in my ears that intensified with every step taken closer to the tree, and when I was less than 10 feet away from it, I got a sharp pain above my right eyebrow that felt like a red-hot needle stabbing me. It was overwhelming, but as I walked away from the tree, the pain and ringing subsided. Being the type of person I am, we got really curious and started walking back towards the tree, and the ringing starts getting louder, and the pain happens in my head. Okay, so despite my experiences with the paranormal, I am a natural-born skeptic. So I called up my friend, asked her to come over and tell me if she noticed anything. She also said she got the ringing and pain. It was really weird. We talked about it at a safe distance for a bit, and decided to leave the area, as we were getting a really bad feeling about the tree. That night, we both had really awful nightmares that we were lost in the woods, being blood-soaked in some sort of battlefield, and being chased by zombies. It all sounded really weird, but it was all really freaky. This year, we talked about it again. We both vividly remember that tree. We've also never wandered into that particular corner of the woods again. What we both agree on is that there's a malevolent energy contained in that tree, and something really horrible must have happened there. I have a friend who practices magic, and I may take him out there to try to cleanse the energy, but I honestly am a bit afraid to be in that corner of the woods ever again. This happened on the 30th of December, 2013, during the hours of 2:30 a.m. and 4 a.m. I would like to stress that what I express in this story is not of imagination or of games, but something evil and mysterious myself and two friends had encountered. I would like to note that we were under the influence of weed, however, nowhere near the point in which it would affect our ability to tell reality from fiction. Not to mention, I have been smoking for years, so I could handle myself. Anyway, it was a fairly quiet and dark night. I and two friends, we'll call them M and C, had been planning on going out to let off some fireworks near a park near C's house. I would like to stress that C lives right in front of a very mysterious open and endless forest just behind a residential area. We had entered the forest numerous times before. Out of all the mysterious and unquestionable evil experiences we had shared there, this was the one that made us want to seek out what I've been seeing, hearing, and feeling. Following this experience, we have encountered many weird and unknown things from this forest. From two mysterious brightening little red dot meters in front of us disappearing and appearing constantly. to the sound of footsteps being distorted all around us, and also unknown carving-like images in trees, although none quite as blatant and direct as what we saw that morning. We had all decided to head down to the park as we were eager to finally let off the fireworks. As we initially started walking down, say about 100 meters from the entrance, I could see a sudden change in facial expression on C. When confronted, he would deny feeling worried or anything, and would keep stressing that he was keen to see the fireworks. We approached the entrance when I noticed that both C and M had mysteriously gone quiet. Nothing was said, and we entered the forest. As we were walking, we noticed that bats had constantly been trying to swoop at us, and it was as if there was a never-ending amount of them. We decided to have a quick stop for our cigarettes, and me and C sat down on a log. The one thing that still brings goosebumps down my spine is the fact that someone as loud and cheerful as M had not spoken a word, and instead of sitting down with us, turned his back to us and just kept looking out into the bushes and trees as if he was observing something. When I asked what was wrong, he simply replied that we needed to take a piss, and I dismissed it as anything out of the normal. This is when things turned very eerie. We all decided to hurry up and get out of the woods and to the park as soon as possible, as we all started to get a very weird feeling, a feeling as if we were being watched by something or someone that really did not appreciate our presence. The next part of the path we took is somewhat of a sharp and blind bend in which you are not able to see anything past it until you are actually on it. I and C had been in front the whole time, and M a few meters behind us, still very quiet. It was when we had just stepped foot on the blind path that we saw it. It began at the very corner of my eye. A blinding, bright light appeared which lasted a split second, as if it was diminishing. The face and outline of something or someone appeared merely a meter in front of us. And at this moment, not one word was said. Instead, all three of us were frozen in shock. I suddenly had the urge to run as far away from this thing and not look back. The second I started running, C and them followed. Now, I would just like to note that I am a religious person, and that throughout this experience the Lord's Prayer was constantly playing back in my mind, although this was not intentional. It was as if my own mind was doing it without even me noticing. We had finally gotten to the entrance. Throughout what seemed to be a merely 5-minute sprint, the whole way back endlessly and endlessly, the amounts of bats were constantly following us and swooping right behind us. It was when we exited, and all tried to regain our thoughts and breath, that I saw the absolute look of fear on C and M's face. I'm not denying that I hadn't just gone through one of the most terrifying experiences in my life, but the look I seen on specifically C's face was something I could not explain with words. We all finally decided to walk away from the forest along the outskirts path and find a suitable quick area we could let off the fireworks and go back home. These next experiences are what solidified to us that what we saw was no mere illusion. Something was following us and wanted us far away from there. After 10 or so minutes following the path, we found a spot. As I was walking down towards it, I felt a sudden pull as if something was making or wanting me to follow the direction into the woods. This was quickly dismissed and ignored. This is our last mysterious experience of the night before we decided to leave. As I and M were sitting down ready to light the fireworks, we noticed C standing near a meter or so behind us. We asked what was wrong with him, and he said these very words: "I can sense the fear," in a voice which I had never heard C use before. And after a minute of questioning C what the hell he was on about, we heard one of the scariest sounds or screeches I have ever heard in my life. The sound is embedded. This was no normal creature sound. In fact, there was absolutely nothing behind us, as we were in an illuminated area and had clear vision all around us. The sound of a grunt, an angry growl, and loud and irregular breathing patterns could be heard all around us. Quite frankly, I'll cut the bullshit. It sounded like a demon. It was from then we all had enough and rushed back home. None of us have been able to get our heads around this experience. Back home, he said that he felt a genuine presence of evil, and that when we were standing up, when he had been sitting down, he had seen a large black figure in the distance. We stayed up the whole remainder of the morning, trying to figure out what it was, when ultimately, it was denounced as an evil mystery. I'll start by telling you a few things about me. I'm 18 years old and live in northern Canada in 2 different homes. One is with my father, who lives right in the middle of 222 acres of woods. We've got but a single neighbor, who is situated about 1 kilometer away. My second home is with my mother. She lives on the edge of a city, close to the woods and the main shopping center. The story is split into 3 parts, and believe me, it may sound crazy, but I swear, all of this is true. The first part of the story starts at my father's house. I'd often go for walks in the woods. It was peaceful and quiet. I'd always bring my 3 dogs for protection, a German Shepherd and 2 Australian Shepherds. Nothing ever happened in the woods. There was the occasional sighting of bears, and we found quite a few lynx tracks, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until something started watching me from the woods. A black figure of sorts. And at first, I thought it was just my paranoid mind playing tricks on me, so I shrugged it off. A few days passed since I first felt the strange watching presence. It was a cold day out. The sun was gone and the wind came from the north, making it even colder. Though it was around noon, and it was time for me to bring the dogs out for a walk. I brought them down to the road that leads to my house. Nobody was around and it was silent all over, except for the wind blowing through the tree leaves. I was calm, but then it felt like I was being followed. Of course my dogs were following me, but this feeling was dark. I continued and eventually turned back to go home. Everyone was gone, so I arrived to an empty house. As I was about to bring the dogs into their kennel, I noticed one of the Aussies was frozen in place. He was staring into the woods. I tried to get his attention, but he would not budge. I walked over to him, pat his head. He only growled, but not to me. He growled to whatever was in the woods. The dog was pacing, tail tucked between his legs and ears held back. That made me feel a little uneasy, since I had been feeling watched or followed during the walk. It also meant I wasn't the only one who felt it. I decided to be safe and locked the door when I was inside. I'd like to say this feeling left after a while, but no. It only became more frequent. I had to lock and cover my windows at night because it felt as though someone was peering through them. I told people about it, especially those I lived with. They'd tell me it was a bear or maybe some ghosts. A few even mentioned that it could be a stalker. I knew it was neither of these things. It just didn't feel right. Fast forward to about 3 months after the first occurrence. It's September, and the weather has begun to get colder. I was outside with my dogs cleaning some skulls I had recently gotten from a trapper. I was just minding my own business. All of my family members were gone, so I was left alone again. Then I went near the forest and felt the dark presence again. It was so strange. I just couldn't shake it off as nothing. Scared, I went inside and decided to make myself some food in the comfort of my home. The fear left, and I felt safe again, until I heard the dreadful sound coming from the woods outside. It sounded like a man screaming, a deer howling in pain, and the low growl of a bear, all at once. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. I checked all the doors and ran to the second story of the house to hide. Not sure why I felt so much fear, since I heard nothing after that, but I called a relative, and they told me I was just hearing things. That night, I could barely sleep. I was afraid of whatever this thing was going to come inside. I kept seeing things in the shadows of the trees. After this incident, it was hard to ignore. Eventually, I went to live with my mother in the city. I was there for a better chance at a job. I also had some friends to reunite with there. Once I moved, I met up with my childhood best friend. She and I decided to take a long walk in the chilly temperatures of the night. We talked and talked. Nothing happened until about 11:30. We were crossing the street when I heard the same exact sound, but much louder, coming from the woods down the road. I was terrified. My friend, though, paid no attention to it. We continued walking, but I was a little more paranoid than before, just waiting for something to jump out after me. An hour passed and we had to split ways. She went home and I did too. I had some instrumental music playing on my phone to keep me calm. Obviously, that didn't last long. Of course, something had to happen in the dead of night while I was alone. As I walked in the streets, heard a baby scream, but it didn't sound normal. It was a horrifying, distorted scream. I looked in the direction of the sound and thought I saw someone there. My feet moved faster than before, trying to get me home. Then I heard another scream, much scarier than the first. I ran for it. That might not have been the best decision, but it was instinctive. Suddenly, I heard feet hitting the pavement. It felt like something or someone was chasing me. I looked back quickly and thought I saw a large black figure coming, but it only lasted several seconds till I saw nothing. The shouts and screams did not stop though. I finally got home, but I realized the door was locked and couldn't get inside. Unfortunately, those screams continued. After many calls and pressing the doorbell, my stepfather opened the door. I was a hyperventilating mess, but I got through it. I'm very spiritual and I've been told by many mediums or spiritual leaders that I am a beacon for bad spirits. I assumed that it was a bad spirit, but I remember reading about Wendigos, a creature that is apparently connected to me in some ways that are unknown to me. I did research again and deeply believe that whatever followed me is still watching me. I'm not sure if it's a Wendigo, but it could be. Some acquaintances agree that it is quite possible. Now I'm just waiting for my next encounter with it, and I'm left wondering, what does it want, and what will it do next? Before I start this story, I should probably give you a little description of the place and myself. The area where this took place was out in a small farming village. There are basically sections of woods and farmland. On this occasion, the section of woods I was in had 3 defined barriers. To the north was an old railroad track. On the south and west was an open farmer's field. The east basically led to a denser block of trees. He'd eventually come to a road about a mile away if he didn't get lost. As for myself, while I wasn't a hunter, I always had a good sense of direction. Even when I couldn't see the sun or had any other guidelines, I was extremely comfortable with being alone in the woods and not afraid of going to hike in the dark. I found it peaceful actually. I still do, but I'm more observant now, if that makes any sense. I also don't scare easily, and I don't go into a panic too often. Finally, I am also somewhat observant to the spiritual world, having seen and felt entities before this. So, to begin my story, the day started like any other day on a winter afternoon. I thought that I would go out to explore some patches of woods that I mentioned before. I always found it intimidating, but being a young kid and having explored everything in the area, this was to be one of the new places I would map out. So, I set out with bare minimum gear, really just an extra set of gloves and my favorite hiking stick. I knew there were still a few hours of daylight left, and I figured this wouldn't take too long, so I didn't think I would need too much more than that. When I first entered the patch of woods, everything was still and noisy. I could hear squirrels, birds, and the wind in the trees. Seeing as it was my first time, I stuck close to the border, walking along the length of the field. Eventually, I came to the southern border and noticed a few interesting rock piles, and I went to investigate. That's where I made my first mistake. Was not going back the way I came. I was in my explorer mode at this point and wanted to see everything, so I decided to go back through the heart of this wood. As I got farther into the heart of the woods, I noticed that several things were starting to become off. All the noise seemingly died down. At the time, I rationalized that, as I was the predator, so all the animals quieted down for me. Now, I'm not so sure. The other odd thing was that I had to sense that I was being watched. It felt like from a distance, though. The final thing was that I noticed when I tried to backtrack, going back was harder than going forward, almost as if I was being led somewhere. I checked my internal compass, as I don't get lost and haven't except for that time, which indicated the direction I was going was north, and strongly north of that. As I was walking along, I could still feel the gaze of this thing, but it seemed closer now. Looking behind me revealed only trees. I continued on, despite the fact that the area I was in didn't look like the area close to the railroad tracks. What I didn't know was that I was heading towards the deep patch of woods, where it would be difficult to find someone. Suddenly, I felt the thing move closer still. There was no noise, and I tried to say it was all in my head, or a hunter was messing with me. But what didn't help was the fact that whatever this thing was, it was either so silent I couldn't hear it, or it wasn't something physical. I could feel this thing increase its pace. At this point, the trees up ahead thinned out and I came into a field. It took me a few minutes to realize where I was. It quickly made an adjustment to my course. I felt the thing again increase to my speed, narrowing down the gap between it to myself. I lunged deep into the railroad tracks, the northern border, and all the sounds came back. I could hear wildlife again, kids screaming at a nearby pond, and farther off I could hear vehicles. However, I still felt the eyes glaring daggers at me, just out of sight in the denser woods. It felt evil. The nasty energy radiated off whatever it was, but it would not show itself, nor did it step foot onto the railroad tracks. All on my way home, I still felt it following on its side of the woods, till I came to civilization, and it seemed to turn and leave. As to say what it was, I cannot say. I have experienced a similar feeling 2 places since then. Once at a cemetery, and the last at an asylum in Ohio. I hesitate to say it was a physical creature, as I never saw or really heard anything, but I did feel it. Looking back now, I'm wondering if it was possibly something that thought I was up to no good on its turf. Then maybe it was purposely trying to scare me off. But why chase me deeper into the woods? I haven't been back to that area since, and I don't plan on going back anytime soon. This is something that recently had happened to me a few weeks ago. I have more encounters while hunting, but I will share those another time if this goes all right. They're a bit longer and more strange. I am from Southwest Georgia and live right on the Georgia-Alabama line. I was riding dirt roads one night with my friend and her younger sister. We were fishing earlier that evening and didn't have any luck, so we decided to get some beer and go for a ride. On into the night, after riding dirt roads in between Lumpkin and Georgetown, we went to a spot I know pretty well. That was a swamp, off the side of the dirt road. So we get out and decide to chill for a little while. About 30 minutes pass and I decide to walk down a little ways into the water and cast out my pole with some stank bait on it. My friend is behind me, standing beside the truck with her sister in the back seat. And for a few minutes, no one is talking, and no music is playing. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my friend screams, and not just a scream, but a horror movie type bloody murder scream. Like it scares the living shit out of me, and I think someone just died type of scream. I go from complete and relaxing silence in the middle of a swamp in Georgia to a scream. It'll scare you, and I don't care who you are. So I turn around and I yell, "What's wrong?" And as soon as I said that, something ran past me into the water. Keep in mind it is completely dark and my spotlight is in the truck. This thing, I don't know what it was, ran by me on 2 legs. It did not make one sound until it hit the water. It goes off into the water and it sounded heavy, and then all of a sudden, nothing. As if a year flew away, as silly as it may sound, or it went underwater. Because the noise stopped out in the middle of the swamp. It was moving so fast, if it would have hit the woods, I feel like I would have heard something compared to it running on the clay. Now, all of this happened within a time frame of like 3 to 7 seconds. But, in my mind, this was all slow motion. I walked up to my friend and her little sister jumps out of my truck and is standing beside me. I asked what the hell happened, and they have no idea. But my friend said she looked over from her phone and saw something standing beside her, and she never heard a single thing walk up to her. Her little sister was on the other side of the back seat, and when she looked out the window, she said she saw a gray ear, but didn't say anything because she thought I was playing a joke or something on them. Putting the two together, the creature stood beside my friend and never made a sound for about 5 minutes until she screamed. All 3 of us confirmed it was on 2 legs. I've hunted here my whole life. It wasn't a deer for obvious reasons. It wasn't a coyote because it was too short. It wasn't a hog. It wasn't a deer. So, what could it have been? It obviously wasn't a small animal like a raccoon or a opossum. We don't have bears in South Georgia either. So I can honestly say, and even after asking people's opinions, for my 25 years of being on this earth, I have no idea what walked up on us that night in the woods.